You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Here's your host, Jake.
Hi, it's Jake here. Welcome to The Voluntary Life. I'm very pleased to have a special guest on today's show. It's my friend Daniel Mackler. Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Jake.
Thanks for coming on.
Good to be here.
Yeah, we're sitting in sunny Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, and hopefully we're going to not get too hot because we've got the windows closed in order to not hear the sounds of the jungle outside.
And the dogs barking.
Yeah. So we did one interview already previously on the show about psychological freedom. Mm-hmm. And I thought it'd be great to talk again today because you have a new book coming out soon. Is it going to be in the next couple of weeks?
Yes.
And that book is something that I think relates to the broader topic of how to get more freedom in your life, which I talk about a lot on this show. So could you just give a brief background to, your book and what it's about and the subject matter?
Well, it's called Breaking from Your Parents. So right away, the subject matter is a bit of a controversial topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So this subject, breaking from your parents, is something that I think it is really controversial. Can you tell me, what your thoughts are about, why have you written this? What is this subject? Why is this important to you?
Well, first I just got to laugh because I haven't even talked about it publicly. There's a handful of people I did write on my website for the last year or so. I've been acknowledging that I'm writing this book, but never talk about it. 99% of the time I don't even mention it to people. Like where I'm staying right now in Mexico, people say, "Oh, I'm a writer," they say, and I often don't even mention that I'm finishing up a book because it's such a controversial topic with a lot of people. I don't even want to get into it. It's almost not even worth it sometimes because it stresses people out. Everybody has an opinion on it, and 99% of the time it's a very different opinion than mine. I know I'm not talking about the subject matter exactly yet. I'm just kind of giving a little background about why it's intense, and it's a little stressful even to talk about it publicly for the first time here with you.
Absolutely. So what does it mean to you, this subject? Why have you chosen to write this book?
Well, I've broken with my parents, and I've realized the incredible value in it. And what I've come to realize is I see the value for other people too. So I've gone universal with it. I think it's something that could be very useful to anybody, basically. And not just breaking with your actual parents, but breaking with the parents that are inside of you. The six sides of our parents that we've internalized, that they've basically thrust on us. To break up with those parents inside of us, they become healthier people, more free people. People who can actually live lives that are just better lives, healthier, more mature lives, where we don't have to end up repeating the patterns that our parents drove into us. So for me, it's really just breaking up with sick parts of our history and becoming better, more productive, more satisfied, more mature, healthy people who do more good in the world.
Right. Well, I've had a chance to read this book, and I think it's brilliant. I think it's really the best thing that you've written, and I think it's a really important book for anyone to read, wherever they are in terms of thinking about their relationship with their parents. Because I also know that I think in terms of the amount of personal freedom that people experience in their lives, their relationship with their family, and especially their relationship with their parents, is such a huge aspect of how free you really feel like you can live and how much joy and satisfaction you get out of your own life. And I know that there is very little written on this subject, I think, because it is such a controversial topic.
Yes, there are some things written on it, but nothing that I found satisfying out there. There's a book, Divorcing Your Parents, and then there's Toxic Parents by Susan Forward, and Alice Miller writes stuff about parents, but I didn't feel anybody took this subject on in a way that really spoke to my experience, spoke to the broader issues in a really comprehensive, correct way. Nobody that really spoke to me, that really said what I wanted to say, what I felt really was important to say, what needed to be said. And so I took it on, and I took it on head on. I decided not to, as we would say, I didn't soft step the issues. I didn't pussyfoot around. Instead, I really just said what I believe, and what I believe is based on what I've seen, not just in my own life, but in the lives of a lot of other people. And wow, yeah, it was not an easy book to write. It was definitely, there was a lot of turmoil it took for me to give birth to this book. taken 2 years.
Right.
And I'm a quick writer. I mean, I think I wrote my first draft in like 7 weeks, something like that. No, I wrote my first draft probably in 2 weeks. And then I just kept rewriting it to get it to what I said, what I wanted, because it was like, some of it was hard to get out. It's tough to, it was tough to even admit to myself that I was going to take on this subject. But I felt like there was nothing that was calling me more in terms of what I wanted to write about, what I wanted to express, and what I wanted to share with the world. I just see what families do to people. I see how they mess them up. Families, to me, are like their own little cults. Each family. Their own culture, their own cult. They're each person's first culture. They're the introduction to the world, and parents have incredible power over a child, more than governments have over their citizens, more than people in jail. Prison guards have over prisoners. I mean, parents can totally define the reality of their children, for better or for worse. And what I've experienced, what I've observed in people, is basically in most cases it's a combination of both. Well, actually, in all cases it's a combination of for better and for worse, but usually it's skewed a little bit more toward the worse. There's obviously extreme cases, and the books that do write about people, about breaking up with their parents, divorcing your parents, etc., tend to focus on the extreme cases and say this is when it's okay, it's an important time to break from your family, to take distance from them, to divorce them, when there's like rape and horrible things like that going on and terrible incest. But what about the, quote, normal families? Not even quote. What about the normal families, the norm, the majority? And to me, that's where I go. I say these are situations where it's good to break with one's family. These are situations where even the norm is just horribly screwed up, really backward in their point of view. And that it's to all people's value, to all people's benefit to get away from that and to find something new, to really explore something different. And I think it's very hard to really explore at a deep, fundamental level something really different. It's like learning a new language. It's very hard if you're going to be immersed in the old language. Like here, we're in Mexico. If I want to learn Spanish, I have to go out and speak Spanish a lot. If I'm going to speak English all day, I'm not going to learn Spanish very much. Well, I think it's the same with breaking from your family. If you're going to stay around your family, you're going to keep speaking the language of your family. It's going to just intuitively kind of happen. And if you're not going to be around your family, you're going to get an opportunity to learn a whole new way of being at a much deeper level, and to really correct some of those horrible errors, to work out some of the traumas. I think it's good at all levels to break with one's family. And the thing is it okay if I just go on a little?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Just because someone breaks from their family doesn't mean they're going to necessarily grow. Breaking from their family is one part. It's just like if I came down here and I refused to speak English, it doesn't mean I'm going to speak Spanish. I could just be alone all day. I have to get out in the street and I have to actually work at it. I have to study at it. And if I don't do that, I won't speak English. I'll be lonely, but I won't learn Spanish. It's the same with breaking from your family. People can break up with their parents and just become social isolates. Or they can break from their family and just totally, absolutely repeat their family system in new relationships. Their friendships, their romantic relationships. They can go and have kids of their own and just do the exact same thing that their parents did with them without having any contact with their parents. And I've seen this with a lot of people who do break from their families. They don't actually change that much. But for me, that's why the second key part of it is breaking from that family.
Within.
Exactly. Within oneself.
Right. And I want to talk about some of the suggestions that you've got, the action that you've got for the self-reflection to do that as well. But first of all, to carry on a little bit about the background, there's a really interesting part in this book where you talk in the beginning of the book about why, if you do want to individuate and break from your parents and sort of define yourself, and kind of, if you've noticed these toxic patterns in your family that you don't want to continue and you want to kind of create your own life, and for you, if that involves this path of breaking with your parents, then you've got a chapter about why the world resists you. Can you tell me, sort of give an overview for people what your ideas about that are?
Why the world resists you?
Yeah.
I'm actually having a laugh because you've read the book more recently than I have.
You forgot what's in that bit.
Oh God, what's in that chapter? I remember liking it. I remember enjoying writing it. I'm like, hey, can we turn this around, brother? And I start interviewing you. So let me ask you, there was a chapter in this book called Breaking from Your Parents where this fellow talks about why the world resists you. Wondering what your impressions on that chapter were.
Well, let me tell you the idea that I found really interesting.
Okay, go for it, man. I'll riff off it, because I can tell you my opinion on why. I just don't remember exactly what I said in that chapter. chapter.
Well, what really got me, and I think what's really relevant for personal freedom, is you talk about the idea that people generally have that your parents kind of own you, right? And that if you choose to break with your parents, you're breaking a huge taboo, because the underlying idea is, your parents gave you life, and so they, in a sense, you're kind of like property.
I think when you're a kid, you are property. They say, my children.
Yeah.
And yes, kids say my parents, but it's in a different kind of way. In the same way that an employee says my boss, and the boss says my employee. It's a little different. So yes, I think that parents do have a sense of ownership over their children, their property. When you walk down the street and you see someone carrying a cute baby, and I say, oh, what a cute baby, they say, thank you. Like I've just complimented their car or something like that. And they don't, and it's funny, I think that in one sense, it's not entirely bad that parents have that sense of incredible closeness with their children, because children need that sense of being held and nurtured and having really good boundaries around them and really feel like they're a part of something special. The downside is when parents are a little bit screwed up, which all parents are from what I've seen, all of them. And they start transmitting this screwed up stuff to their kids, and they do it with a sense of ownership and in a sense of entitlement. So they screw up their kids, basically. And the kids have no way to resist, because essentially they are owned by the parents. So, I mean, there's simple ways that are kind of neutral with parents own kids. Like they decide the kid's language, and the kid learns this language. Then there's ways that are less neutral. Like the parents basically decide the child's religion, and the child goes along with it. And for many years, that's what the child is raised in. But then also whatever toxic stew is in the family, in the family meal.
And I think the key for me is that, whereas a child needs all the protection and nurturing and support and everything else that a parent has to provide, and so as you say, it's in some ways it's clear why there's this really strong bond, and maybe that partially explains this kind of sense of ownership that parents have. The issue is adult children, and how it relates to how they continue, in a sense, kind of having that kind of sort of idea of belonging to their parents embedded in them.
Well, the way that parents screw up children is by traumatizing them. And there's the conventional sense of the word trauma, which is when parents do horribly screwed up things that emotionally overwhelm the child, and the child can't resolve it, so he just buries it inside himself. And I go by that conventional definition of trauma. The difference between me and 99% of psychologists is that they view this as a rather rare thing. I view this as the norm. The norm traumatizes their children. They overwhelm their kids freak out. It's just the difference between 99% of psychologists and me is that most people in the world don't really relate very well to children. So they don't actually see what children go through. So what happens is when children internalize all this horrible trauma and they split it off, they become locked in time as children. And then they grow up and they become physical adults like you and me. And what happens is they're still children at some fundamental parts of themselves, and it's all split off, and then they carry on those patterns forever. And if they don't break from their parents, if they don't start digging into those traumas and grieving and self-reflecting and working it out and making sense of it and healing from it, then they're just going to keep doing it forever. So in that sense, they will be owned by their parents forever. They're going to be owned by the screwed up sides of their parents. And that's why you get adults and whole cultures that just literally just kowtow to worshiping their parents. Well, my parents did wrong, but they loved me and I love them, and everybody makes mistakes and they did their best and all this. And it's so important that we need to forgive them. And it's like, forgive them. You never even dealt with what they did to you. That's what I observe. And so I say it in my book, but I believe it in my life. No. Bad attitude. Don't forgive them. It's not about letting go of this stuff. It's not about putting it behind you, because that's all fake. You can't put this stuff behind you. It's within you. And if you forgive them, it's like you're ignoring what happened. The thing is that you need to feel it. Part of those feelings may be uncomfortable. It might be rage. It might be anger. It might be a lot of fury. Those are what would be called more the overtly negative things. A little bit less negative might be feeling really sad, feeling betrayed, feeling a lot of grief, feeling loss, really feeling hopeless, depressed. These are part of it also. But going through that healing process, is then there's, okay, that's not something you want to get stuck in, and the anger and the sadness and the grief, but that's something to work through. And once people work through it, they get to be something different. They become their own individuals, where they're no longer beholden to their parents. It breaks the cycle of psychic ownership by parents of children. Right. So, like, I would say for me, I've made huge strides in not being owned by my parents anymore. Inside my head, my parents still feel they own me. If I had that attitude of like, well, you know, they still kind of do, and I went back, it would like revert very, very, very quickly to them having that sense of ownership and feeling comfortable and valid, violating me and doing whatever they wanted, crossing my boundaries, being disrespectful. And for me, I see that they haven't changed. A little bit they've changed, but not in any significant way. I realize if I want to have the life that I want, if I really want to be independent and free and manifest my gifts and be the person that I feel like deserve to be in the world, and I feel like everybody deserves to be the best they can be. And I had to get away from those people. And someone had to call and say, this is done. This dynamic is over. And what I saw with my parents, when I started breaking away from them, they didn't like it. The world didn't like it, and my parents didn't like it. And what I found is I had very, very, very few allies. And I've been on this path for, give or take, 20 years of breaking from them. And the last, I don't know, 4 years, I haven't seen them at all, I haven't talked to them at all. 10 years, barely seen them, just a few times. More in my 20s. I'll be 42 soon. And in my 20s, it was more going back and forth. I still would have a few years here and there where I wouldn't see them, but I'd go back and test the waters. But now it's like, what's the point? It's like, I love who I've become so much more, and I see that I'm still becoming this person that I love more. But for me, it's more of an internal job now. I don't need to go back and get anything from them. I've got what I can get from them. And now it's like going back, it's just going back to people who could and would hurt me. It's like, I mean, I'll use the analogy, a little dangerously, I'll use the analogy of romance. It's like, I broke up with a girlfriend who treated me like shit. And it's like, no, we're not really friends anymore. You treated me like shit repeatedly. And it's like, okay, we're done. It's over. I don't want to have bad blood with this ex-girlfriend, but I don't want to see her anymore. I don't want to talk to her. I don't really want her in my life. It sounds harsh because it's really, it really is just an analogy. It doesn't all fit. Because I feel like anything that I had with an ex-girlfriend, I had 50%.
Right.
And that's very, very different. With my parents, I did not have 50% in it. I was a kid who was vulnerable. They were adults. So the things that were screwed up in our relationship when I was a child, it came from them. When I was an adult, I have a part. And so if I did anything bad to them, I have a part in that. And that's why as an adult, it was my responsibility to do the right thing first. And the right thing for me was get away. Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. So I was just going to say, so, you know, you in the book, what you're describing is that for you, your process of healing your own traumas, the stuff inside you that was messing up your life and your relationships, your process involved breaking from your parents as a necessary part of that process, do you think? Is that what you think?
Well, at first I think yes, it was necessary, but it was also an exploration.
Right.
Because in my book, I don't tell anyone, go do this. This is the way to do it. Break from your parents, get away. It has to come from within. And
right.
I think if people wish to do this, it's their right to try it. Maybe even their responsibility to try it. But the motivation for this has to come from within, not from me.
Yeah.
But I would say we owe it to ourselves to try to become the best people we are. And I would assume that people listening to this would give some consideration to the idea, think about it for themselves, and decide for themselves if it feels like it's something that could benefit them in their lives.
I think it's a really important thing idea, as you say, to consider. Right. Because whatever you choose to do,
exactly,
this is something to consider your relationship with your parents and what impact it has on your freedom.
Yes.
That, I think, is especially your psychological freedom and your own healing.
Yes.
Whatever you choose to do is your own responsibility, your own choice, whatever works for you. But the question is, have a think about this. Yes. And that is challenging a taboo, because the taboo is that you shouldn't even go there.
Yeah, exactly. You should love your parents. They gave birth to you. They gave you life. They gave you everything. They made you who you are. And now you turn your back on them? What a disrespectful child. You're selfish. You're immature. Oh, he's just going through something.
Yeah.
Oh, he'll get over it. Or he deserves to be punished. Cut him out of the will. I've experienced that from my dad. That was one consequence I got years ago. Oh, you're not going to play the game the way I want you to play it? Well, guess what? You're not getting my money. And at first it was like, I thought, what an asshole. And then I realized, but in a strange way, actually, he's helping me declare my freedom.
Yeah.
He's letting me know that this is where he's willing to go if I don't play his game. And then I realized, wait a second, I've actually dealt with that message my whole life, from both him and from my mother, that if I didn't play the game they wanted, they were not going to give me stuff. And I realized it a long time ago. I was like, oh, their love was really conditional. And I think that's very, very common with parents. And the conditions are not expressed explicitly for children a lot of the time. Actually, that's not true, though. I have to take it back, that when children are very little, they do get it. Parents give them the message.
Explicitly.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it becomes kind of hidden.
Yes, exactly, because it's such an ugly thing to acknowledge. It's the kind of thing you can acknowledge with a little child. Listen, you do this, or this is going to be the consequence. And you can very easily damage a child by just ignoring them. I'm not going to give you the love, I'm not going to give you the hugs, I'm not going to give you the kisses. I'm just going to be annoyed at you. And for a parent, being annoyed at a child, especially for an extended period of time, is emotionally devastating for a kid. It's rejection. It's neglect. It's abandonment. And for a child, they can't handle that for a length of time. It kills them inside. They start literally emotionally dying inside. And that's how parents can control their kids. It's one way among many. So when my dad did that to me when I was an adult, I was already independent enough where I was like, oh, it rang a bell in my head. He's going to cut me out of his will. This is familiar to me. This has been happening to me my whole life. That's the message. You don't play my game my way, there are going to be consequences, and I will try to reject you, abandon you, and hurt you. Really what he was saying is, come back and love me the way I want.
Yeah.
But by that point, I was like in my 30s. I was like working and had my own business and doing, I'm like, it would have been nice to think that someday I could inherit more money and have a little bit more power to be, an adult in the world who could do what I wanted. But then part of me, I was like, at what cost?
Yeah.
Screw him. I'm not going back. What an asshole.
Yeah. But you know what's really interesting is that the things that you talk about, because the next part of your book, you talk about a whole series of things that you can do to consider if you are thinking about breaking from your parents. What can you consider to help you?
The actions.
Yeah, the actions. And one of them is about financial independence and so forth. And we can come on to that in a minute. But what I wanted to just say was that what's really interesting is that all the things that you describe, which are actions that to sort of as part of the process of breaking from your parents, they're also things that are just part of the process of individuation.
Yes.
They're not, like, regardless of your parents, all these things are things that help you actually become free in yourself and become your own person. And I think that's great. And there's another reason for people to read this book, because it's about individuation fundamentally. Yes, it's about your parents, but it's truly about becoming yourself.
Becoming your own parent.
Right.
That's the flip side of this book. Underneath it, it's just like how to take care of yourself. How to basically be in control of your own life in a healthy way.
Yeah. So I want to talk about some of those actions, because I think
I'm impressed, by the way. It seems like you know the structure of my book better than I do. I'm just sitting here talking about my opinions and my experience.
Well, I've just read it, so I've got the more recent reading of it. But yeah, so I want to talk about the actions. And one of the ones that you mentioned, and I know this is something that you have really thought a lot about and has been very important to you, is journaling.
Yeah.
So what's the idea behind journaling in relation to this?
Journaling is having a relationship with yourself. It's just, there's lots of different ways to do it, aside from journaling. But the essence of journaling is self-reflection. I am having a relationship with me on paper. My thoughts and me. So it's like, it's redefining a new loving relationship with myself, where I can express my thoughts and my feelings on paper in a way that I can see them. And I can redefine who I am and really remove outside influences. So it's a very pure relationship. It's, once upon a time, in that old-fashioned religious sense, they would have said, it's having a relationship with God. I personally don't use those words. But I think journaling is having a relationship with the healthiest, most mature, most honest, caring, self-loving, self-respecting part of ourselves. And it's also a practice, I believe, of like exercising a muscle, getting stronger at it, getting better at it. And again, I'll return to my own experience, but I can talk about it in theory also. My experience is when I started journaling, I was 17. almost 18, and I started writing about stuff that I realized it was not safe to talk about in my family. And it was revelatory for me, because here I had this book where I could, and I had a lock that I'd drilled through the book and tightened it so no one in my family could sneak in and read it, and oh yes, they would have. Where I could sit and write about what I was thinking about myself, my inner world, what I was thinking about them, my anger, my fear, and I realized it was like a rope was thrown to me that could pull me out of this morass of my family. And it started to, and I started, it took a while to catch on, but I started writing more and more and more, and I realized the more I developed a relationship with myself, using journaling as a vehicle to do that, the more I became independent. And it started paying big dividends in my life. I started being able to get away from them, starting to be able to think independently of them. Like I notice a lot of young people and people who aren't so young, their conception of the world is based on their parents' conception of the world. I started breaking from that, and journaling really, really helped. Where there weren't negative consequences for journaling for me. There were negative consequences about sharing my feelings in my family. My journal did not provide conditional love. Through my journaling, I was able to provide myself with much more unconditional love and go into parts of my mind and my history and my past and my life and my feelings and my troubled sides, because I had a lot of troubled sides coming out of my family. I did not escape from my family of origin unscathed. I did not start, early adulthood as a super healthy being. I came out with certain healthy qualities and certain gifts, but also certain really screwed up sides that were directly related to how they behaved and what they'd done to me. And journaling allowed me to look at it and just really explore my life, explore my dreams, what I wanted, who I wanted to become, what was holding me back. And it was basically a gigantic math problem that I just wrote about for years, and constantly putting in new input and coming up with new conclusions. It was a place to explore ideas, to experiment with what I might want to do, and I found it was paramount in helping me change my existence, my definition of myself, literally my inner emotional state. I restructured my mind through journaling. Okay, I went to psychotherapy. I found that not particularly helpful, not even in the same league as journaling. I bet there's other things that were very, very helpful to me, actions that I took, but I think journaling was the primary one, which is why I put it first in the actions that we can take.
Yeah.
Just like it was before all else, me having that relationship with me. I think it's possible to do it just through thinking, through inner dialoguing, but I think that journaling, something that concrete about getting it down on paper, was just far and away the most helpful. I don't feel like I need to use it. I still journal, but I don't journal nearly as much as I used to.
Let me ask you about, you mentioned psychotherapy, and let me ask you about that, because there is a chapter in there about therapy.
I think there's 2 chapters, maybe 1, 2.
Well, you talk about it in the actions section for sure, and you've got a really interesting take on it, because you were a therapist, right?
10 years.
But you're not, in this chapter, you're not sort of giving this glowing recommendation for therapy at all.
No.
So what's your take on that?
Like, why don't I give a glowing recommendation of psychotherapy?
Well, I mean, you sort of are recommending it, but you're also saying it might not be any good. So do you think...
Should I be polite or should I be blunt?
Be blunt.
Most psychotherapists are losers. They haven't done the work. They don't have that much to offer.
Right.
They actually are they're more allied with your parents than they are with the healthiest part of you that needs or wants to break away.
Right.
So how can you go to someone who has more of an alliance unconsciously with your parents and their own parents than they do with the best part of themselves and the best part of you? It's like going back to your parents for help, to break away from your parents. It's not going to work. It's like the analogy that comes to mind for me is it's like wanting to break out of Scientology and going to a therapist who's a Scientologist. Yes. Or I was going to say, it's like being a woman who's in an abusive relationship with a man and going to a male psychotherapist who hates women.
Right.
It's like, good luck. Do you know what I mean? He's going to tell you, well, maybe he really does love you, and he's trying to make up for it, and he's really trying to change, and he gave you all those nice gifts, all the wrong things to say to a woman who's being abused by her boyfriend. I like your analogy too. Fantastic. Trying to break out of Scientology and going to a Scientologist for help. They're going to say, well, they're going to always put it back on you.
Yeah.
Well, you're
really, just not trying hard enough.
You're not trying hard enough. You're selfish. You're holding back. You're not giving or going to a super Christian therapist to discuss
atheism.
Or to discuss your feeling that you don't believe in Christianity anymore. They're going to tell you that that's the devil speaking. That's the devil speaking through you. If they're not super honest, if they're not willing to also go to that place to challenge those fundamental questions themselves, and most therapists have not done that. There are certain things that I think therapists who have not broken from their parents still can be helpful to, to people with. But in general, I just don't advocate for therapy unless I think the therapist is fantastic, and I don't know very many fantastic therapists.
Right.
So, if I think I don't recommend therapy. I recommend therapists.
Right.
So
individual therapists, in fact, who are really good.
Specific therapists who I think are really good.
Yeah.
Why? It's like a lot are bad. They're shysters. They don't know what they're doing. They can really hurt people. I've personally experienced them, and I know a lot of therapists in the world, and most I don't think are that good. And I think it's not like most therapists are competent, and a small number are really incompetent, and a tiny little number are fantastic. It's like, no, I think most therapists are actually pretty bad, and a very small number are very good.
Right.
But it's sort of like it's a reflection of our world in general. Most people are not that healthy, but a very small number have overcome that hump of doing a huge amount of inner work and have a lot of insight and really have something to offer the world. But personally, it's like I feel like I have enough tools in my life that at least now and for the last however many 10 or 15, 10 or I haven't been in therapy since the early 2001, so that's 13 years. I've had zero desire to go to therapy. Just it's not something that I wish to do. I have other tools that are for me useful enough that I don't need it.
Right.
And I think that's great. And I don't feel that was bad that I was a therapist, because I was a therapist where I feel like I was offering people a lot of stuff. And if I felt like I didn't know how to offer them something, I was honest about it. But I also felt at a certain point it was better that I not be a therapist. I had other things I wanted to do with my life. But even when I was a therapist, I would tell people, I believe your job in therapy is to figure out what I'm doing to be useful to you, internalize it, and get rid of me.
Yeah.
Render me irrelevant in your life. You don't have to pay me anymore. I mean, isn't it nicer to have human interactions about emotional stuff where it's not money on the table? On the other hand, when people pay a therapist, they're paying for someone who really is committed and dedicated during that time to be 100% on the side of the healthiest part of them. Their wounded inner child, their healthy inner child, their healthy adult self. And that's a sacred relationship. So that's the good side of psychotherapy, which really good therapists can really use to the fullest, or to the fullest of their ability, to really be there for someone. And it's like a chance for accelerated, intense, intimate, healthy interaction, which all of the focus for the healing is on the person who's paying. It's for the client. So I don't think psychotherapy theoretically is bad. I just think most therapists are just not up to the task of doing a good job. And often it's sadly what I've seen is the more they charge, the worse they are. It's one of those bizarre inverse relationships where it's like a lot of the worst therapists,
charge a fortune.
Yeah, they get a nice office, they dress well, they're in a good neighborhood, and they know how to do the certain thing, and the men have the perfect little Freud beard or whatever silly. I mean, it could play out in a million ways.
Yeah.
But it's like they're charging a lot, but what are they really offering?
Yeah.
It's shysterism.
Okay, cool. I think that's really a great, clear encapsulation of what your thoughts about therapy are. I want to ask you about another chapter in the actions one, because I found this a really lovely chapter about friendships.
Yeah.
And it's actually something that, I don't think a lot of people talk about friendships quite in the way that you do as part of the process of kind of, breaking from your parents and individuating.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about the role of friendships and how important they are?
It's funny, it's easier for me in a way to speak about it personally, even though I write about this stuff theoretically and personally, because my book is full of examples of people.
Yes.
And I am one of those people who I give examples from my personal life, because I decided to go personal in this book to really tell it. I talk about my parents and my relationship with them, which is a big change from my past, where I haven't spoken much about my parents at all. People who've read my other stuff probably know very little about my relationship with my parents or who they are or what they're like. But friendship, for me, is a relationship between two equals. People who really give and take freely, have good boundaries, care about each other, love each other. But I believe it's the model for all healthy relationships. It comes through this thing called friendship. And I think it's a a wonderful way to affirm the best of who we are, and in return to affirm the best of who someone else is. And I write about it in my book. I didn't have any really deep, honest friends until I was 27, 15 years ago. 27 years without a really deep, honest friend. And it was a lonely time. I had some friends, people who I called friends, good friends in some ways, and I had my family. But when I got a real friend, someone who was really there for me, who I was really there for him, who we had healthy boundaries, it was not tinged with problems of money or romance. It was just, we really liked each other. We had a lot of common values. We both made taken a lot of strides to breaking from our families. So we really had a lot of each of us had a lot of the best of our own healthy personal qualities were manifested and could interact. And there was just something fantastic for me about meeting somebody who was like me, who just really was a lot like me. And it was like, when I found him and when he found me, it was actually similar for both of us. We were both like, holy shit. It was life-changing. It really was. It changed my life. And it became the basis for all of my new relationships with others. But I would say this, the real basis for my relationship with others, the basis for my healthy relationship with other people, is my relationship with myself.
Right.
So that's where the journaling part really helped me develop my relationship with me in a healthy way. But that relationship got its next boost up when I met my best friend.
But you know what I found really interesting is in what you said as well is the part about healthy boundaries, because I think there is a risk that some people think that, you know, rather than go to a therapist who has messed up ideas, they'll kind of get therapy from their friends. Can you talk about what you mean by healthy boundaries and why friendships are not like free therapy, basically?
Yeah. Well, in my friendships, I very, very rarely use my friends to help me process my personal issues. That's my responsibility to do. I can think about it. I can journal about it. I can do lots of things to take care of it. I mean, some people want to go to therapy for that, but I think that a friendship is a sacred thing. To not really be very, I think it's to be, I mean, it's not meaning you can't use a friend to help you process some of your stuff, but I think it's something to be used very carefully and very wisely. I noticed as a therapist, a lot of people came to me for therapy when they'd exploited all of their friends to the max and their friends didn't want anything more to do with them.
Right.
Listen, I can't talk with you about your fucked up problems with your girlfriend, your mother, your daughter, your this, your that, your job. It's like, no, and they would come to me, they'd tell me, like, listen, my friends don't want to hear it anymore. They used up, they dried out, they tapped out their friendships. And a big part of it wasn't just that they overexploited their friends with talking about their problems. It was like they weren't giving their friends the opportunity to do it in reverse.
Right.
They became very selfish. And I think a lot of people do tend toward being kind of selfish in friendships, especially if they're in a friendship with someone who has a lot to offer. That they'll say, oh, this is someone who can help me. And in a way...
And you're talking about emotional selfishness, not... I mean, obviously, I think there's a more obvious selfishness in terms of the stuff, but I think...
The emotional, pretty much everything I'm saying in this interview is talking about the emotional dynamics. So I think a key aspect of friendship is this boundaries thing. And what is boundaries? It's respect. And for instance, in my relationship with you, Jake, I have my issues. I've got things that I'm still working on. And yet I recognize that it's my job to process myself. Yeah, I want to let you in on my process. I want you to know who I am and what I'm going through, but I don't want to lean on you emotionally in that way. I don't want to set up that dynamic where you have any sense of responsibility for me, my feelings, my problems. And in reverse, I don't want to be that for you.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel like what you're going through is my problem. That way, we can still have a very good friendship, even if you're going through something really painful. Of course, you can tell me about it. You could ask my opinion about it. Doesn't mean I have any obligation to take care of you or to give anything or necessarily to listen unless I really feel able to do it. And I think in general, what I've observed is, I could say in specific too, the friendships that I've had that have gone way toward the healthier pole, there's a lot less leaning on each other. And it doesn't mean that it's a distant friendship. It's actually the opposite. I think what I've observed with myself and with other people that have really very healthy friendships is by having really good boundaries, having a lot of respect, by not dumping on each other, by really listening to what the other person wants, needs, and feels, while the other person is also listening to what I want, need, and feel, can actually become a lot more intimate. It really is, to me, it's the recipe for really strong, long-lasting, solid intimacy.
Yeah, and I think that's fantastic. And I've noticed, we've talked about friendships, while you've been down here, and one of the things we were talking about is how, when you do your own processing and you process your own stuff, that doesn't mean that you hide yourself away and don't talk about things. But the difference is, for example, Daniel, when you talk to me about stuff that you have processed, then, we have a close, intimate friendship, but I'm not being asked to do the work for you. You're telling me about, your life. You're being authentic, but you're not saying, splurge, here's a bunch.
Help me, I'm all messed up, I don't know what to do, solve my problem. And part of it, how it relates to the greater subject, talking about breaking up from parents, is that I think when people lean on their friends and use their friends for a lot of processing, essentially kind of use their friends like mini therapists, and their friends use them as mini therapists, in a lot of ways I think they're replicating their unresolved relationship with their parents. With their friends. They're treating their friends sort of like idealized parents who have some sort of obligation to take care of them. If that is the key, when people are young children, their parents are obligated to help them, to take care of them, to provide nurturance, to do all the things that mature people who have responsibility over somebody else's lives, who created that life, really need to do. That's their job. And yet that's not the job of a friend. And I think a lot of people who have a lot of unresolved issues from their childhood, who haven't gotten into that, who haven't strongly developed that really healing, mature parental relationship with themselves through self-reflection, they are hungrily looking for other people who can help take care of them. And it's like, to me, that's not an answer. Because when I get that too much from people, that's a sign that I need to take a step back because they're not really respecting me. And can also happen in romance. That's so commonly happens in romance. And I say that in a vulnerable kind of way because I was celibate for more than 10 years and I'm just coming out of celibacy. I'm exploring romance again and I noticed romance is even more intense than friendship. But what is romance? To me, at its healthiest, at its root, romance is friendship. It's just a much more kind of super committed, kind of distilled kind of friendship that adds other things into the friendship, like sexual interaction between bodies and sexuality. But it's such a recipe for deeper feelings to come up. And I think if people have not yet mastered the art of how to be really good friends with people, they're not going to be able to master the art of romance.
Right.
It's going to be even harder because it's a higher level skill. So for me, I put it off for a long, long time. And I'm just coming out of it now, just trying to figure it out. And it's like, whoa, I'm noticing this is like friendship squared. It's like, ooh, or friendship calculus. It's a little harder here. And it's like,
absolutely.
It's not something that I can't master. It's not something that and when I say master, I mean really learn to integrate it as a part of my life that could be satisfying for me, satisfying for the other person without a lot of drama, without a lot of conflict, something that really mutually feeds both of our growth processes. That's what I'm working toward. I'd say I'm pretty good at it, kind of good at it, but getting better. With friendship, I feel like I've had a lot more practice at it, and it's good. I feel like that's what I needed to work on.
Right.
But even before friendship, I had to spend years really developing that relationship with me.
Yeah.
I was becoming friends with myself because coming out of my family as a child, I really learned a lot of bad lessons. I wasn't the greatest friend to myself because my parents weren't the greatest friends to me.
Your sort of process is like you build a good relationship with yourself, then you build a good relationship with your friends, and then you build a good relationship with your romantic partner. So kind of like it's sort of like that's the building blocks I think that you're describing.
And I would say the ideal building blocks, and the thing is my parents didn't totally screw me up. I need to be clear on that. It's like in a lot of ways my parents were pretty good. I feel very grateful that they were in some ways. It's like thank God, whatever God be or doesn't be. But because I saw people, childhood friends of mine who had way more screwed up families, had one parent, people who were adopted who had no biological parents. They were abandoned by both. It's like never met their dads. A parent died when they were young. Horrible situations. And here I had two more or less stable parents who worked, who could provide for me financially in a lot of ways. I got my bedtime stories and all sorts of nice things, but they were really screwed up in a lot of other ways. But I think the ideal is to have two healthy parents who each individually have a healthy relationship with their own internal self, then have a very strong friendship develop with each other, then have their romantic stuff worked out really healthy, and have a whole community around them of people who have done that. So so the child is born into a world that's not just two parents isolated in the world, because I think that's what a lot of healthier couples are now. They're this isolated bubble of more than average healthiness, surrounded by complete idiots all around them. And it's very, very hard to be healthy, let alone then bring a child into the world. So it's like this super healthy world that I envision would be a place where a child could come into the world and be so respected that it's just going to be a natural matter of course that child is going to develop a healthy relationship with himself or herself. Coming out of that, when they come time to grow up and become more of an independent individual, any relationship they have, and even their childhood friendships, are going to be naturally healthy because they're going to gravitate toward people who are also healthy, have that healthy relationship with themselves. So you're going to get two people who individually are already friends with their own individual self, becoming friends with each other, and they're going to build that healthier world. That's the world I envision in the future, assuming more people actually take the steps toward becoming real healthy individuals and break away from the sick shit of their childhood and their sick parents. Right. But unfortunately, it's like the world doesn't hand that to people on a platter, which is part of why I've written this book at all. It's like this is a different template to how to change our own individual selves, change our relationship, change the whole way the world is. Then I think maybe it might be more appropriate for people to have children, bring children into a world where they're going to get loved and respected and not have to do all this stressful, horrible grieving that's so incumbent on us if we want to be healthy.
Right.
I don't want to do any of this stuff. I don't want to sit around exploring my navel and doing all. I wish it had all been done for me. Yeah. Wouldn't it have been nice if I never got traumatized, if none of us ever got screwed up and our parents were all awesome? But I think considering that didn't happen, it's like there's a lot of work that we have to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you want life to be a sense in which, when your life starts, it's like the starting gun going off and you're like a sprinter that just gets to go and live. You don't want to have to stop and reevaluate and look internally and do all of this reprocessing. For 20 years. Yeah. No thanks. I don't think it has to take 20 years. I mean, for me, it was just like nobody I knew was doing this. I didn't literally meet anybody until my late 20s who was even talking about this stuff. So I think it's much harder to do this stuff in isolation. Like how lucky that you want to interview. How lucky for me, how lucky I think for you, I won't speak for you, but how lucky for all of us that this stuff is now becoming less taboo so we can talk about it. But I don't know, I was scared to do this. I was nervous too because I think it's a really controversial subject.
Yeah, people get really pissed off about it. Yeah. People get really threatened. It challenges the root of people's existence.
Let me ask you about one of the most controversial or tricky subjects in the actions section. And that is the question of confronting your parents and what role you think that plays, or maybe it's, if you could say a little bit about what role it plays for you and whether or not there is something that is applicable for other people,
Oh, brother, this is an interview in and of itself.
Yeah.
It's a whole subject. So.
And I do want to say, by the way, I'll put this in the show notes, that I know you've done a series on confronting your parents on YouTube.
Oh, right. Yes.
So I can put that on the show notes. So in fact, that may be a way for us to kind of park some of the bigger issues that you've talked about there. But
and I've written about it on my website. I have essays about it.
Have you got anything that you think has your view changed since those YouTube interviews?
Well, I did those YouTube interviews 5 years ago. So my answer is, I don't know. I don't remember what I said, to be honest. It's like, a lot of times I don't go back and read my old stuff. I just tend to create new. So I imagine it's probably the essence of what I'm thinking now. I think it's probably just this book says it in a more comprehensive way, held in a context of a greater subject matter.
And let me see if I can summarize what I remember from those is that your point is basically, look, it can be helpful to confront your parents, but it's also a very potentially traumatic and risky thing to do. So it's kind of like, pursue at your own risk. It seems to be what you'd say.
Very much. It's like mountain climbing, rock climbing. Whoa, you can get a lot out of it. You can learn a heck of a lot about yourself and about the world. But you can also fall and bust your ass, and it's like a lot of people, their confrontations with their parents don't go well. It's sort of a high risk, high reward kind of thing. And so I've done a fair amount of confronting my parents, and it's been definitely overall incredibly worth it for me. But it has not come without a lot of hell, a lot of heartache, a lot of fear, a lot of rejection, a lot of like stupid things I've done. I've heard of people ending up in jail as a result of confronting their parents. I've heard violence come out of it. I've heard people ending up in psych wards. I've heard like people getting cut out of wills and things like this. And I've heard stories of parents admitting stuff that I've heard people. One thing I've heard with confronting parents, yes, people have lost a lot. There's a lot of risk, a lot of stuff that really can be lost. It's very painful. A lot of people don't realize how much they're going to lose. But pretty universally, what I've heard is people learn stuff. You learn stuff about yourself and your parents. I've learned stuff about myself and my parents through every confrontation. And I think there's different ways to confront. I think it's like there's direct face-to-face confrontation. There's telephone confrontations. There's people who write letters. There's people who write emails. There's people who... I mean, even in the most basic way, just pulling away, not talking to them is a sort of confrontation. But I have 3 chapters in this book on confronting parents, and I'm talking more about direct confrontation and ways how to minimize the risk and really open up the rewards. But wow. I would say it's definitely wise to be careful. Yeah. This is one where this is a general rule I've seen. General. Parents don't like being confronted about their worst behavior. Yeah. They don't like it.
Yeah. And just by doing it, you're breaking the family taboos. You're breaking the old relationships. So, sparks are going to fly one way or another. Emotionally.
By the way, can you hear all those dogs outside?
Yeah.
I'm wondering is this coincidental? We're talking about confronting parents, the dogs are going wild. Yeah. I can hear them all. But yeah, sorry.
They'll provide the soundtrack for this conversation.
Open the window.
Mexican dog soundtrack.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about the last action thing, which I think is also a really positive and important aspect of both this question of breaking from your parents, but also just individuation. And that's the chapter that you've done on working in the world. And it's really about, gaining your own financial independence, fundamentally, your financial independence from your parents. I personally consider this to be essential. Yeah. Whatever happens in your relationship with your parents, even if you can continue to, spend every holiday with them for the rest of your life, I personally think that gaining financial independence is just part of growing up.
Yes.
And there are many people, even middle-aged people, who are being subsidized by their parents, and I think that's psychologically unhealthy, that actually undermines your individuation. But that's a more practical side. What about the emotional side?
Well, I think the practical side is also an emotional side.
Right.
I think it's all connected. Well, I'd say it's ultimately pretty simple. There is something in terms of gaining one's own confidence, independence, self-esteem, and all that stuff with paying your own way. What is it? He who pays the piper calls the tune?
Right.
If your parents are paying your way, then at some level they're still calling the tune. And I know people who go on, psychiatric disability and the dole and all that, and maybe that's not bad as a transitional thing, but ultimately it's like, well, who else? Who's paying the tune now? The government, and blah. And so I think that there's something, I've seen it in my life, I've seen it in a lot of other people's lives. It's incredibly liberating to know that you can function in the world. And functioning in the world means you have to give something of value to the world and get something back. And that thing is money, and then you can decide where you live, you can decide what you eat, you really have earned it. And I just have found that to be a beautiful, liberating thing, because in some ways, the ways my family hurt me, it damaged my ability to interact in an optimal way with the world. I had to work through a lot of this stuff. On an emotional level, working through it allowed me to become much more independent and in a way much more successful too. I see the people who do not achieve financial independence from their parents, do not know how to function in the world in a way that provides the world enough of a service so that the world can give something back to allow them to have independence, those people really don't get a great sense of satisfaction out of life a lot. They're really hobbled in some sort of primary way, and it's very connected with unresolved childhood trauma. To me, what is a child? A child is someone who doesn't know how to work in the world, doesn't know how to function in the world, needs some intermediary group of more powerful people to take care of him or her. And when an adult grows up and still can't work in the world, can't be financially independent, can't take care of himself or herself, it actually is replicating the young child's dilemma of being dependent on somebody else. And I think that becoming more psychologically free lends people an ability to become more independent. But I think becoming financially independent and being able to work in the world also lends people an ability to become more emotionally free.
Yeah.
So it's a positive cycle. Those two things feed each other. And I found that both have worked to the advantage of the other in my life. I feel very grateful that I figured out how to gain my financial independence through, and sometimes it was through really hard ways. I mean, I didn't always do it. Even some of my 20s, I lived with my mom for 2 years. Very, very depressing. I lived on her couch and I had some savings, but it was like, she paid the rent. I didn't give a darn dime. I helped do the dishes sometimes. But 2 years of that was like, some of the jobs I had before and after that were not the most, societally respected jobs. Washing dishes in restaurants and tossing pizzas and temping and typing and doing whatever anybody asked. Just, I needed money for very low pay. But in time, I was able to, as they say, pull my shit together and really decide, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life, and start building a career that really allowed me to become more independent, more functional, and to do work that I really valued. Not just, after washing dishes, it was like, there was something kind of valuable about it, because I could see, here's a dirty dish and here's a clean dish. I did that. But being a therapist, for instance, or I worked as a musician before that, things that I thought were more connected to who I was, my real gifts, things that I could really offer that actually really did help people, especially being a therapist. And then after that, becoming a documentary filmmaker, and having done that for the last 4 years, realizing, I am changing people's lives. I'm offering a service and a product that really is of great value to a lot of people. And that feels good. It had nothing to do with my family. This wasn't really what I was trained to do. My parents, I think, at some level, by psychologically crippling me through a lot of their actions and their behavior toward me, kind of broke me. And I kind of felt like I was not able to make it in the world. And so a lot of my inner work was really breaking some of those messages, grieving the loss that I had to lose my parents to get rid of those horrible messages and really become myself and realize, wait a second, I got so much that I can offer and do. Feels great, much better to be where I am now than where I was 20 years ago. Way better.
Awesome. I think that's so cool that you've managed to distill all these actions together, and I really appreciate all of the personal stories that you've put in from your own life, and also you've given lots of stories and examples from other people that you've anonymized, from people that you've met who've had their own experiences. So I also found that to be really valuable to hear. There's lots of different perspectives in this book. It's not just this is what you need to do, or this is one way of doing it. This is actually, my reading is, it's an exploration of this subject and all the different ways that people have approached it and what some of their own experiences have been, so that you can make up your own mind and decide for yourself what you want your relationship with your parents to be, how individuated you want to go, and explore it for yourself.
Yeah, that's it.
So where can people find this book when it is going to be published?
Well, my plan is to start by publishing it on this Amazon Kindle deal. I don't even know much about that. I'm going to figure that out. I think I'm going to also sell PDF copies and maybe at some point do a print version also. I don't know. This is also, I'm doing an exploration also of different ways of getting it out there.
Yeah, but I'm sure...
As cheap as possible so people could really have access to it in different ways, quickly, immediately. But I don't know. I'm just learning.
But I reckon your website is probably a good place for them to come to.
That would be logical.
So let's tell them where to find you.
Wildtruth.net.
Perfect.
Click on the books part. Wildtruth.net.
Excellent. Daniel, thanks so much.
Yeah, great to be here. In person this time. Last time I think you were in England when I was in America.
That's right. It was on Skype. It's much harder.
Yeah, I'm actually not used to doing interviews like this, just sitting in front of a mic. It's a little different. Okay, Jake, well, thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to The Voluntary Life. If you have feedback about the show, please email jake@thevoluntarylife.com. If you enjoyed this program, please share the podcast with your friends or click the donate button on thevoluntarylife.com.